adolescents, and adults. And we provide therapy and evaluation services, and we do actually provide telehealth services. Some of our clients are choosing to use phone conferencing, particularly if they're doing something like family therapy or couples counseling, but we do have options, and other providers do as well, where you can have multiple screens going at one time. So if you're doing family therapy or couples counseling, that doesn't necessarily mean that you can't engage in this way. So many of my clients are asking the same questions that a lot of you are asking. So what I'm going to spend my time doing is kind of a brief intro, 5 tips that I'm trying to get across a lot of different people, and then going through some of the questions that you all have asked. So most of us right now are experiencing some level of grief and loss, anxiety, fear, irritability, difficulty concentrating, and worrying. Some of us are experiencing more depression because we're feeling isolated, particularly if you're living alone. Some of us are experiencing physical sensations related to anxiety, depression, and tension. And it's really an important thing to pay attention to, that if you don't normally feel anxious, that you might be experiencing that stress in your body, and that's a way that you can have a clue into maybe something is changing for you that you want to pay attention to. And even if you're not overly concerned right now, maybe you're doing okay with working from home. It may be that something happens a month from now, 2 months from now, or even after we're all kind of back in, hopefully, normal living. Then you might experience some kind of aftershock effects, and that too is totally normal. I know it sounds strange, but it's really important to remember that whatever it is that you are experiencing right now, that is within the bandwidth of normal. That doesn't mean you don't want to get support and that you don't want something to feel different, but you should not beat yourself up. It's a really important time to have compassion for yourself and compassion for other people. So here are my 5 tips. Really thinking about where you're getting your information in order to make appropriate decisions. So I don't know about you, but in the first couple of days, I'm actually not a social media person, but I was all over Facebook. I was checking to see what my friends were doing. I know people in Seattle, right? People in Maryland, people in New York. I was just watching to see what everybody else was experiencing and going through. And then I kind of freaked out, got overwhelmed with all of that information, and realized maybe I should watch the news instead. And then that kind of freaked me out too. So really thinking about how much and where you're getting your information from. Make sure it's not a source that's likely to have fake news, but then also thinking about how often. So my tip number 2 is it's actually a time to reduce your screen time, which can seem odd because we're all trying to get more information. We want to make good choices. We want to be on top of what's happening, but you really need to think about how you are taking the information in, what is it doing to you, and then what are you doing with that information. So is there a way that you can set some limits on, you're going to check social media once a day, twice a day, you're going to check the news once a day or twice a day, but then you're going to give yourself a break because most likely you're having to be in front of a screen anyway for work. So really being thoughtful about how much time you're spending in front of a screen, but also thinking about if looking at the news or looking at social media increases your anxiety or your irritability, because you hear about other people who are maybe not practicing as safely as you think they ought to be, and that might also stir up some stuff. The other problem with screen time is that it can increase our impulsivity, reduce our concentration, and it really can, multitasking really can limit our productivity. So if you're having to work from home, you want to be thoughtful about how you manage your screen time in addition to your workload. Number 3 is coping and normal habits and self-care. This is really important. You want to think about all of the things that you already know and put those into action now. Sleep is really important, and our schedules might be off. My kids aren't in school right now, so I don't have to get up quite as early to make sure that they get to school on time. But if I stay up late and I don't get up at a kind of usual time, then I'm going to be all out of whack. So really thinking about how you want to stick to as normal a schedule as possible for yourself and for your children, if you have them. Eating is the same idea, right? I don't know how many people out there are stress eaters or decide that they don't eat, and maybe not decide, but they tend to not eat when, feeling stressed out. So really thinking about how you modulate what you're putting in your body. Are you eating healthy foods? Are you making sure that you're eating throughout the day, right? If you're staring at a screen because you're doing work from home and that's not normal for you, or are you still taking a lunch break, that type of thing. Getting exercise, it's really great in some ways because maybe you don't have as much of an excuse. You can jump on your bike. I have one of these exercise bikes that has a flat table that I use for a stand-up desk more than I actually use to ride the bike. And so thinking about, this might be actually a time where I can use it to ride the bike while I'm reading a report, or if that's the time you're going to check the news, that you use some sort of exercise component with that. And that can be either the same or separate from getting outside. So getting outside is really important right now. Even if you have to maintain, the distance between people, the sunshine and green space and even blue space like lakes is really important for our overall mental health, and being able to be outside and engaged in nature can be really helpful. It's important to think about drug and alcohol use. And if you have been, drinking a little bit more than normal because you're stressed out, or you have been smoking a little bit more than normal because you're stressed out, really thinking about, are you doing that in a moderate way, or is it something that you're a little worried might kind of get pushed over the edge, and paying attention to that. Stress is a time where if you've had a history of substance use in the past and you have been, in sobriety for a while, that the stress might increase your likelihood of a relapse. So it's really important to think about sticking to your plan. And the same goes if you have other pre-existing conditions: depression, anxiety, a history of trauma, bipolar disorder. Keeping on your medication, in your regular routines, and sticking to what your treatment plan is really important. And then doing something that helps you feel better in general, a hobby. So it doesn't have to be all work, even though it's hard, right? With working from home, especially if you have kids, it doesn't have to be all work. Use this time to get back into a hobby that you haven't done in a while. It maybe is time that you want to pick up a new hobby, or maybe you just want to set aside some time to read a good book. But making sure that you're doing something for you, and making sure that you're doing something to pay attention to what's happening in your relationship if you are at home with a partner. Because you want to make sure, particularly as you're, kind of all on top of each other, that you are not losing sight of the most important relationships in your household. So whether that's having a good fun time with your kids, or having a really important conversation with your spouse at the end of the day, your partner, making sure that you're engaging in some, kinds of activities where you are feeling more bonded to that person, rather than we're cooking, we're cleaning, we're doing our work, we're doing, taking care of the kids. So that's 3. 4 is structure and boundaries while maintaining some flexibility. This might mean that at the beginning of the day, at the beginning of the week, you set yourself a work schedule, you set a kid schedule as well for school, and then have some flexibility. So what's happened in our household is we've had certain meetings in place and some things come up. So then we've had to move things around, and that can be really difficult. I see somebody saying that they're redecorating rooms. That's awesome. I love it. So thinking about how you can put some sort of structure in place for yourself for your work schedule, for your kids' schedule, but then also the normal stuff. Do you always eat breakfast together? Do you always eat dinner together? Do you always, watch, I don't know, Thomas the Train at 5 p.m. together? Whatever it is, making sure that you're kind of sticking to that structure. And then making sure that you're also setting boundaries for yourself and boundaries for your workplace to the extent that you can. Really trying to not get caught up in, I'm actually available all of the time. No, you still need some sort of, this is my work day and this is my family time and this is my self-care time. And now is the time to make sure that you are taking a walk by yourself, take the dog out by yourself, go read a book, go lock yourself in your bedroom. If you have to, take an extra long shower, right? But just give yourself the opportunity to have some alone time because we're all gonna need it. And paying attention to increased tempers and irritability, and trying your best to think about walking away when you can. Times of stress are when things happen like domestic violence and child abuse. And so in my line of work, I do a lot of court work. This is one of the things that I'm most concerned about, is whether or not people are going to be in this confined environment and something really bad is going to happen and people are not going to know what to do about that, or they're not going to feel like they can reach out. But one of the things that we have pulled together is a number of resources for you guys in case you are worried that things are kind of going down the wrong road, just help kind of right the ship. And then the last thing is probably the hardest one, in the sense of radical acceptance. And that is thinking about breathing, doing a body scan, noticing what is happening in yourself, both physically and then emotionally, and then deciding what you're going to do with it. Because this is out of our control. We don't have a lot that we can do to change the situation. We can work on our own behavior, but we can't change what's going on outside of our control. So being able to notice what you are experiencing, maybe you notice that you're feeling anxious and you come up with a thought bubble is kind of the way I like to think of it. Some people have other visualizations. You have thoughts on a train and they're going to go away this direction. Put them in a balloon and send them off. But don't ignore what you're feeling and don't get overly mired in it. We have to accept that this is where we're at and how can we deal with what's going on in a healthy way. And again, I can't help but notice that people are organizing their spices and deep cleaning their house. I think that is an excellent way to deal with a lot of this. So I'm going to go on to answering some questions, and I'm actually going to ask if I can know how much time I have left. I'm kind of a speedy talker. Hudson, do you know how much time I have left?
You have about 3 minutes.
Oh my goodness. See, okay. So some of the questions related, thank you, Hudson, were for strategies for coping with grief and anxiety. And I think I'm somewhat covered that, and the need to have recovery time for yourself as a parent, particularly if you have, I guess I shouldn't say that, whether you have young children or older children. It's a whole different dynamic in your household. So making sure that you do take time for yourself, but then take time for yourself as a couple. And that might be that you open a bottle of wine and you just sit there and have a chat at the end of the day. Maybe that you want to make sure you watch that show that you two love together. It can also be really bonding to read to each other. We do it with our children all of the time, but if there's a good book that the two of you have always wanted to read together, this can be a time that you can focus on doing something like that. Thinking about if you are not engaged in treatment with somebody and you are concerned about how does this telehealth thing work? How can I meet somebody for the first time over a screen? I've had a number of new clients in this time frame, and so we've only ever met this way. And I think there's pros and cons to everything. I think it's more important to be able to get yourself connected with somebody who feels like they are a good fit for you than to be worried about whether or not you're in the same room with them, because I think fit is really important. And a lot of people feel bad if they kind of go therapist shopping, but I strongly encourage you to, have what we like a discovery call where you talk with somebody about what's going on. Most people will have a brief conversation with you and you kind of get a sense of who they are and whether or not that's going to work out for you. And then just give it a go. And then if you don't like it, you can try somebody else. One of the other things that I think was really an interesting question was related to how to stay like active mentally during this time frame. And I think that particularly if you have lost a job, if you are, or you have a kind of a weird shift, and so there's a lot of downtime for you right now, to really think about what you find interesting and challenging. So that might be that you've always liked crossword puzzles, but you've never had the time to do them, and you kind of go back to that. But I think also, again, thinking about not getting sucked into the whole of social media or only watching the news all of the time, that you find something that is active and engaging. And can you do that in a social way? So now that I've just said that, maybe you can do it through social media. But is there a way, can you pick up the phone and talk to the person that you haven't talked to in, a year because life gets crazy? Can you do the crossword, not the crossword, Scrabble over the computer with your friend who lives in another state, even maybe is in another time zone? Something that is intentional and engaging with other people. And even if you've never thought that meditation would be a thing that you would be interested in, this is the time that if you ever had any interest in it, you might even try something like a 1-moment meditation. There are a lot of apps. There is even a book that's called 1-Moment Meditation, where you just take 1 minute and you do that, rather than feeling like you have to sit on a mat and go, because that's not for everybody. But that you really think about ways that you can kind of focus your energy and breathe, and that can actually be really stimulating for your brain as well. So I think that's it for now. My time's probably up. I really appreciate it. I know Hudson's going to send things out, but I want to encourage people that even if you don't feel like you're comfortable doing telehealth, just give people a call. I'm happy to have people call the office and talk things through, right? If you're trying to figure out what you want to do, you're looking online and you're not sure how to pick somebody, that you can feel free to give me a call, and I will do my best to call you back quickly so that we can have a brief conversation about that. Thank you. And now I'm gonna pass you on to Dr. Jessica Tomasula, and she is going to talk to us about dealing with your kids during this time frame.
Hi guys, thank you so much, Dr. Kastikian Jones. So as she mentioned, my name is Dr. Tomasula. I go by Dr. T because nobody can say Tomasula. I am the manager of behavioral health services at Wakeman Children's, and I also see patients and families in the clinic for our pediatric weight management program. And I am going to talk to you a little bit about how to cope with this crisis for kids. But I want to go ahead and let you know that most of the questions that you guys asked were, how do I talk to my kids about this? So I'm going to go ahead and get that one out front before I talk about my slides. And it really depends on the age of your child. And you have to manage yourself when you are about to have this conversation. So for young kids, unless they ask you or seem concerned, the rule of thumb is to answer the questions that are asked. You don't need to go on and on. They may not care, right? as long as they have their question answered. And if you can't answer it, like you don't know when they're going to be going back to daycare, right? Or at school, then you say, I'm not sure. We're all staying at home right now so that we make sure that we stay safe and that we keep other people safe. And that might be fine for them. So we don't want to give too much information that they didn't ask for. So answer the questions that they have. If they don't have questions, don't prompt them. Don't make it an ongoing conversation if that's not what they need. So that's for the younger kids and some younger school age kids. The older kids, you can have an ongoing conversation with them. And actually, it's a good thing to go ahead and schedule that. They and you are taking in lots of different types of information from different sources of information. And it's good to be able to structure that time so that you can have that conversation. They can talk to you about how they're feeling. You can validate that. Say, yeah, I hear you. I feel that way too. We're not really sure what's going to happen. And that is very unsettling. But I would say make sure to structure that time, because you also don't want to have other people listening in on the conversation, like younger ones who really aren't ready to have that back and forth and who aren't in the process of taking in the information and haven't developed those critical thinking skills yet. So it does really depend on the age of your child, but know that the way to go is just answer the questions that they ask. Don't overshare, and also try to keep a very calm demeanor. Take your deep breaths before you go into it, even if you feel really scared inside. And it's okay to say, I don't know. I'll get back to you with that answer. I'm not sure. Let me check the CDC website, right? Because that's where we know all of the good information comes from, very accurate. So that's okay too. And then you can schedule to say, hey, I'm going to look at that. I'm going to look into it because I don't know either. And give me until tomorrow after dinner, and then we can talk about it, right? Especially if you need a breather or you guys have had a rough day together. Okay, so I'm going to go into a little bit of my slides now. You'll have to bear with me so that I can make sure that this works. I'm going to try to share my slides. Okay, give me 1 second. Oh. Did you share that, Hudson, or are those mine?
These are mine. Is that okay?
Okay, that's fine.
Okay, just let me know when you want to go to the next screen.
Go ahead and click to the next one. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit through what to expect right now, how you can manage your own emotions and expectations as a parent, and how you can help your family members manage that, and then what to expect in the future. Okay, so, gotcha. Okay, you can go ahead and flip forward now. Okay, so the first couple of things to know is set your expectations. So whenever the body and brain experience any type of trauma or crisis, they're going to have changes. Your body and brain are going to experience changes. So of those changes that occur, some examples of physical changes will be you could have more headaches. You could start grinding your teeth. You could have dry mouth. And let me just, yep. Gotcha. So I want you guys to take a look at these examples and say, have I experienced any of those? You can click through, Hudson. Then you're also going to be experiencing maybe potentially some emotional changes, right? Certainly worries and fear. You might even have some sadness or despair related to that. And yes, you'd have cognitive changes too. So basically, this is when we say feeling wonky, right? You may be feeling wonky sometimes because you can't seem to remember things like you used to. You're having trouble making decisions, or you just seem confused, or you might have thoughts that keep coming through your mind, and you might even have images if you've been watching a lot of screens. Some other things behaviorally that you may notice, those things certainly can be that you're withdrawing from other people, that you just can't seem to manage, that you have quite the opposite, where you have a lot of outbursts and you don't really seem like yourself, very irritable or cranky. You could be overly energetic, right? Cleaning out those closets, doing lots of productive things, or you just could feel like a lump on a log, right? Not have a lot of energy. Sleep is something that I'll touch on too, because anytime we feel out of sorts, our sleep is probably one of the primary things to go. And then we could be practicing avoidance. That could be of our daily structure and routine where we feel all out of whack, or avoiding things that we need to take care of mentally and emotionally. So getting back on track, right? We could be, as was mentioned before, emotionally eating, or we could be meal skipping, and both are not good. So we're going to talk a lot about structure and boundaries, right? Okay, you can move forward. So how is it that you know that you're stressed? That's a really important thing to understand for you yourself as a parent, because then you'll be able to understand how the coping strategies that you've used in the past map onto that. So sometimes people know when they're stressed because they start to feel overwhelmed. They have shortness of breath, right? Or they may feel like their shoulders are in their ears and they're super tense, right? Or they just might have this freight train running through their brain of negative thoughts. So the coping strategies that people use to combat where they are aware that their stress is manifesting has to be parallel or map onto that. So I'm one, when I'm stressed, I feel like a little bit short of breath, not COVID related, obviously, but being overwhelmed. So deep breathing really helps me, or even just changing the pattern of my breath. So even through singing can help de-stress, right? If you are one where you notice you have really tight muscles, doing what's called progressive muscle relaxation. For kids, I call it robot to ragdoll, being able to relax and tense your body, relax and tense your body to achieve overall relaxation is a very good strategy. And physical activity. That could be very low impact yoga or running a marathon, right? And then the other thing is, when you're thinking about how you run that freight train of negative self-talk in your brain, not flipping it and saying, well, let me find the silver lining of everything and try to shove out those thoughts, but reminding yourself that your thoughts are not facts. They are just thoughts. And similar to what my colleague mentioned about just being mindful and being aware of those thoughts moving away is helpful. And then thinking to yourself, what are things that I do to pump myself up, right? So positive affirmations, or how can I zone out a bit and meditate? You can go ahead and move to the next. Yep. And so when we talk about managing ourselves, it's really hard to be an adult, right? Adulting is hard, and we can't control all that happened to our kids as much as we would like to. But the one thing that we can control is being a good role model. So that's where I'd encourage you to say and talk through and talk about, how do you cope with the stress that you're feeling right now? How have you done it in the past? Because this is considered a trauma or a crisis event. And so we are going to experience some of those changes that I reviewed before, right? Because the pandemic is one of those things. And that's managing our expectations, and then trying to manage our emotions goes back to figuring out what coping strategies work for us. And it's not a one size fits all, right? So your child and your parents and whoever else is living in your household, they're going to follow your example and not your advice. So that's why you as parents really need to take care of yourselves and practice what you preach, because they're not going to do it otherwise. And you can even get them to do it with you, because you may say, oh crap, the coping strategies I thought I used are not working right now. I used to be a gym rat and they're closed, so I need to figure something else out. I used to overwork, and now maybe my shifts have been limited, I'm unemployed, or I'm working from home and it's just not the same dynamic. You can move forward. Okay, so how do you help others in your family manage? I really like the idea of setting structure and boundaries, as mentioned before, for emotional expression, because you may have little ones who are having lots more tantrums. You may have crankier teenagers, if that's possible, and then school-age kids are probably very frustrated with not being able to see their friends and get out and do all the things that they normally did. So allow them to express themselves. You know that it's not toward you or about you, but if you can get them to have time to say, okay, I have all this pent up frustration, how am I going to get it out? Am I going to write it out? Am I going to cry it out? Am I going to punch it out in a punching bag, right? Can I sing? Can I just yell at the top of my lungs? Allow for that, right? It's okay. Laugh through it, cry through it together, but don't expect them not to have and need some outlet for emotional frustration, right? And I like the idea of having those dedicated check-in times, especially if you're working from home and they have tasks that they need to do. You're automatically going to want to create as much structure and boundaries in your household as you can. And I know it's a very chaotic time, but that's the way kids feel safe. If they know that they have something that they can depend on and rely on, even if they fuss and say they don't like it, that's when they know they feel safe, right? And so I'm going to hit a few highlights of making sure that you structure the way you communicate, right, which we talked about a little bit before. I am going to talk about sleep because it's so important. Physical activity is one that helps, and then a little bit about screen time really quickly. You can move past this. We know that not a lot of people get enough sleep. Kids don't. Let's talk about the intervention. So you can always, to try to create a better sleep structure, do that digital bedtime, which is powering down ideally 2 hours before their bedtime. 1 hour is good. 30 minutes is better than nothing. Try to create that new school routine now that we're doing online curriculum here, and compromise, right? They're going to want to sleep in and you're going to want them to be up at the crack of dawn. So can you compromise and say, what will your early and late wake up days be? If they're having trouble falling asleep, make sure that their environment is conducive to that, right? So if they need a white noise machine, make sure that it's dark. I always say brain dumps are a good opportunity. It's not a journal. It's just you're dumping out what's still stuck in your head from the day's events on one side of the sheet of paper, and then on the next sheet of paper, you dump out what's stuck in your brain for tomorrow, and then you rip it up, right? It really helps the brain kind of decompress. And if they are napping, try to push it to a power nap, 30 minutes or less. And then just make sure you watch that caffeine intake, because lots of different foods and beverages might be in the household and they might have that. So again, we know excessive screen time isn't a good thing. So you can move past that. But to know, what's your baseline? Do you know how much they're using, what they're looking at, where they tend to view it? And then some helpful limits on figuring out how to do that and when to do that. Mealtime is especially important, at bedtime, and then figuring out when you can have your dead zones, which is, I don't care what you do, you don't have to be in bed, but we're just not going to use screens during this time. And I said we, not them, because even if you're working from home, you still have to show them that this is really challenging for everybody and we're going to do it together, right? Yeah. And I love the family media pledge that I put on there, but that'll be in resources. So there are some other ways that you can help structure that time, which I went through apps and things like that. So I'm not a fortune teller, but I do know what to expect in the future from this is to give yourself some grace and your family members that they will need at least a 6-month adjustment period, right? And you may say 6 months, I was fine after 1 month of this, but not everybody in your household may feel that. And just as was mentioned before, it's kind of like an earthquake. So expect that these aftershocks will occur. Not, they might, they will, right? And you may experience a lot of significant changes that come from this pandemic. And I want you to couch that in celebrating those things that are positive that came out of it. You really feel impassioned about other things that you took on or the career that you have, but you also may have disappointing outcomes, right? Whether it's in your marriage, whether it's in your job, whether it's in other relationships, and grieve that too. I just wanted a friendly reminder to say that it is developmentally appropriate in your brain for teenagers to be resistant to change. And so if you think that they need some more support, most mental health agencies right now are not closed. They're providing telemedicine, and for urgent, they will see in person. So if you are concerned about the things that you're seeing or how they're behaving, then you don't let them choose to go, whether or not they can go to the dentist, right? So that's also not a choice that they should be able to exercise to see or talk with a therapist. So that is under your jurisdiction, and they're going to fuss about it, but that's okay. And then we have lots of other resources, but I'm already over my time. So I think then I will hand it back off to, oh, yeah, and that was just a summary slide. So in order to keep in time, our resources will be available to you in slides after the fact.
Apologies, Dr. Tomasula. I think I accidentally clicked on a link embedded in your PowerPoint and it started taking me elsewhere. So I didn't mean to cut you off. I just clicked the link by accident.
That's okay.
I'm going to hand it back off to you and Representative Von Hafen and Representative Batch. My apologies about that.
Thank you guys both so much. I mean, amazing presentations. I know there's so much material to go over, so thanks for trying to condense it just to a few minutes. As we said at the beginning, we got so many great questions. Hopefully, both the doctors have covered some of the questions that you answered before the town hall tonight, but there was a few that we drew out specifically that we thought were good and that maybe they wouldn't cover during their presentation. So I'm going to start with the first question of Dr. Tomasula. And you covered this a little bit in your presentation, but maybe you could, I know the one thing, at least for me and my 3 kids, that is just the uncertainty about what's going to happen. I think at least for myself as somebody who's a very organized planner and I have my calendar set out for months ahead of time, it's been really hard to kind of take life day to day. So I was wondering, what are some good tools or practices for either adults or kids to kind of deal with that uncertainty about what's going to happen, tomorrow or even next month, next week? So that's the question.
Okay, that is a good one. So when we feel out of control, it is tough to bounce back from that. So what I recommend is that you focus on what you can control. And I've seen lots of good examples about how people are keeping productive and to identify those things that you do have control over, right? And that can be your daily schedule, and it might have to happen hour by hour, but as much as you can plan that out and structure it part of your day, feel comfort in the fact that you have control over that. And you can control how much you reach out to your family members and friends. Now that we have Zoom and all of these platforms, you can schedule that time as well so that only children and other kids don't feel like they're in this alone. So as much structure as you can place in your daily schedule, the more in control you'll feel in a very out of control environment.
And so this next question is for Dr. Kuzishin-Jones, and it's about domestic abuse, that domestic abuse is a major concern during these times. And what advice do you have for someone who's experiencing domestic abuse specifically during the pandemic? Additionally, given there are children present in homes every day because of school closings, unsecured guns in these homes present a real danger to those children. Can you stress the need to lock and secure all firearms in the home? And before you address that, Dr. Kuzishin-Jones, I just want to also take a moment just to say, courts, while they are closed, are still open all the time, and for domestic violence protective orders. And so individuals can still obtain domestic violence protective orders. I was talking to a local judge here in Wake County who said that she had more than one person come up this week stating that they did not think that they could obtain a domestic violence protective order during this time because they thought the courts were closed. So I want everyone to know that so that you can share it with as many people as possible, so that you know that shelters are still open, domestic violence centers are still running, the hotline is still available, and they've already seen an increase in calls. So with that, Dr. Kuzishin-Jones, how would you address the question?
Well, I think it's really to say similarly that if something like that is happening in your home, or even if it's not happening in your home, if you're concerned about a family member or a neighbor, that the stay at home isn't intended to keep us from protecting ourselves and one another from other things that are happening in the community, right? So if you need to go get help, you still can go get help. The Interact website actually has a banner on the top of it that you can get on the website and you can click away and it will make it disappear if somebody comes into the room. You can, start a phone call and you can hang it up right away. Thinking about ways that you can be in touch with family members or friends through text, that you don't necessarily have to say something out loud, that you can be reaching out for help that way. And I think particularly if you are suspicious, you're concerned, your neighbors have had kind of loud, angry fighting in the past, and you start to hear something kind of ramp up, this isn't the time to keep quiet. It's really the time to advocate for other people and make the phone call that you might otherwise feel uncomfortable making, because there isn't going to be another outside source that might have eyes on it. You know, if the kids aren't in school, the school social worker and the teacher aren't going to see if there are bruises on the kid, that type of thing.
Thank you. Julie?
Julie's still muted.
Okay, I'm back. Okay, the next question is for Dr. Tomasula. What is Wake Med specifically doing to support community members' mental health? And does the general public have access to those resources?
That's a good question. So I first have to say the community has been so supportive of us. So they continue to be we're just so incredibly appreciative and overwhelmed with the outpouring of support for our healthcare professionals from the community. We've seen families donate materials and funds and words of encouragement, and certainly their time and patience. And by staying home and washing their hands and using social distancing when they're outside, they're also doing their part to save lives. So we appreciate the efforts and are supporting our community in return by increasing our access to our medical providers via telemedicine and, when urgent, in person. My participation in tonight's program is an example of how Wake Med strives to support the mental health needs of the community, and also we continue to work with our local hospitals and our community agencies to ensure that patients with mental health needs receive the right care at the right time and the right place.
Great, thanks.
And our next question is a common one that many people have asked. This is for Dr. Cusician-Jones. How do you explain this crisis to a loved one who isn't taking it seriously, especially the value of shelter in place?
I do think this is really difficult, and I think that it's shifted a little bit over the last week or so because we've gotten different information, right? So I think it's important to stay on top of what is the most up-to-date information on something like, you know, reputable websites like the CDC, so that you can, you know, relay the information that you think is important for them to know. For me, I work with a lot of families who are divorced, and it's, you know, it's a fine line between telling somebody what to do, trying to convince them that your way of doing it is the right way, and providing all of the information that you can provide. And then if you have a family member who's not doing what you think they need to be doing to keep themselves safe, you might have to take a step back, which can be really stressful. But you have to think about all of the people that you might interact with, as well as all of the people that they're going to interact with, right? And kind of thinking of the greater good, in that maybe stepping away is what they need from you in order to take it seriously.
Great. The next question is a generalized question. I'm going to answer a little bit, and if Dr. Tomasula wants to jump in, she's more than welcome. The question was about access to school counselors during this time. As we know, school counselors, unfortunately, in the state of North Carolina are already understaffed. They're already sparse, and the person was asking, are they particularly being overburdened at this time, and if students can connect with counselors while we're out of school. So we reached out to Wake County Public Schools to ask that question, and we got a response from one of their assistant superintendents, and I was just going to read exactly what he responded about school psychologist availability during this time. The Wake County Public School System has a process in place to provide support to students and families during this unprecedented time. School counselors are available to assist in addressing individual student concerns and to help families connect to school-based and community resources as needed. the district is providing communication directly to families to assist them in navigating the resources and supports available to them, and schools are providing direction as to the process for communicating with teachers, counselors, and other staff during school closure. So from what it sounds like to me, if you're interested in reaching out to your school counselor or psychologist, you should reach out to your school administrator, that principal or assistant principal, and they can put you in touch with your school psychologist or school counselor. I noticed on the chat that somebody also put in some information about Project Enlightenment. And if you're not familiar with that, that's a pre-K program run by Wake County Public Schools. And they actually offer, the person said that they offer tele or web parent counseling for parents of young children during the school shutdown. So that's also a great resource if your kids are a little younger. Project Enlightenment, you can find their information on the internet as well. So unless Dr. Tomasula had anything to add, we can go on to the next question.
You covered it nicely.
All right, thanks.
And so our last question for tonight is for Dr. Kuzishin-Jones, and it's, how can the stigma that still surrounds mental health treatment be overcome, or at least addressed temporarily, so that people are more willing to reach out to get help when they need it?
Well, I'm hoping that one of the bright spots that comes out of this is that there has been so much of an emphasis on mental health, and everybody really recognizes that it's not about, you know, having a particular illness or struggling in a particular way, but that we're all struggling right now, and that we all need support, and that being disconnected from our usual environment and surroundings is isolating and difficult for everybody. So I think if you know somebody who seems to be struggling, but they've really been uncomfortable with the idea of going to therapy, this is kind of an opportunity to say, hey, you can have one phone call, one telehealth session. You can reach out to a coach, right? It doesn't have to be somebody who's a therapist. You can reach out to somebody in your church, and maybe the person in the church will recognize that you need to be gently guided over to somebody else who can help you if it's a kind of a bigger, deeper issue. But I really think it's important for us to be gentle with ourselves and really compassionate with everybody around us. And remember that asking for help is a sign, in my opinion, and it is a sign of strength, not a sign of weakness, and that we all need it. There's so much research that we need social connection and that we need to help one another.
Thank you guys so much. This is perfect. It's 8:01 and we wanted to end in about an hour. So this is just perfect timing. Thank you all for the chat we've had going on the side. I think it's been really good discussion. And if you haven't been following the chat, you might want to pull it up here real quick before we end. It has some great tips, like the one I mentioned about Project Enlightenment. Somebody else mentioned Triangle Area Parenting Support, which is also a group that can offer supports to parents. And like Hudson said at the beginning, we'll be sending out all the information, resources, and if you need any more questions answered, it'll have everyone's information on that email. Sydney and my offices are open remotely. We're not at the General Assembly building right now, but our offices are open. If you didn't know, Hudson is my legislative assistant. Thank you, Hudson, for everything. He's amazing putting the technology and everything together. So thank you so much for that. And but our offices are open. There's so much going on right now. If you're not receiving either of our legislative newsletters, please sign up for those. You can reach out to us via email once you get the email after the presentation, and we send out lots of information about everything that's been going on. We also do a lot of other town halls, and Sydney and I'm sure we'll be having some in the future, so be sure to stay tuned for that. And I want to thank both of our panelists tonight. You guys were amazing, offering such great resources and information to everyone, so thank you for joining us tonight. And Sydney, do you have anything else to add before we wrap up?
Yeah, if you guys actually have other ideas for town halls, Julie and I as you guys have known, we do a lot of town halls together, and it's great to be in a neighboring district and to also like the fellow representative in the neighboring district. So we spend a good amount of time together. And so if you have other ideas, by all means, reach out to us and let us know. We're already talking about potentially doing one about domestic violence and resources surrounding that, child protective services during this period of time, which is really important for us to highlight, et cetera. And I also would just like to remind everybody that dialing 211 is a number that you will be able to, it's a confidential number or where you can actually call and get referrals for various services. So food insecurity issues, mental health resources, housing, unemployment, et cetera. That is a number that is being run and is up right now so that they can refer you to the appropriate agency. So if you do need that number, 211 is what you can use. It's obviously free, and it's a great resource for all of us during this time. But again, thank you, Dr. Tomasula. Thank you, Dr. Physician-Jones, for taking the time to talk to everybody about this really important topic. And we look forward to seeing you guys on our next town hall.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Everybody have a great night.
You too.